Hi guys, and welcome back to another true crime and makeup time video. If you're new here, my name is Zara and I post a new true crime video every single week. So if you love makeup and you love true crime, I hope you guys would consider subscribing and join the fam. And definitely leave me a comment down below letting me know what you want to see next. I love when you guys do that, it means a lot to me. Okay, so today's case was requested by Halco. I hope I'm saying that right. And it definitely reminds me of the Skylar Neese case. And if you haven't seen that one, I will link it here or here. And today we're going to be talking about the Michele or Missy Avila case. So Michele Yvette Avila, known as Missy, was born on February 8th, 1968 in Los Angeles. And she grew up in Arrieta in the San Fernando Valley in California. Her parents were Irene and Ernie. And she had three siblings, Ernie, Chris, and Mark, all brothers. And she grew up with her mother and her brothers alone. I couldn't really find much information about her dad. I'm guessing he just wasn't around. She went to San Fernando High School, and she was popular at school, very pretty, had beautiful dark hair, and she was well liked by a lot of the guys at her school, which made her not so well liked by a lot of the girls at her school. And the girls at her school were pretty jealous of her because Missy was pretty good looking and, you know, how kids are. And due to girls being jealous and you know how stupid kids can be, they would bully Missy or just pick on her a lot. She did have one friend though who would always stick up for her no matter what, and her name was Karen Severson. Missy and Karen had been best friends since they were 8 years old. They actually met each other because Missy and Karen had actually lived on the same street. And when Missy moved into that neighborhood, into that street, she actually lost her cat. So she went looking for her cat, and Karen's house was one of the houses that she knocked on looking for this cat. Missy was a friendly, beautiful girl who got along effortlessly with a lot of people. And when she met Karen that day, the two of them just hit it off immediately. Missy invited Karen over to her home and introduced her to her mother, Irene, who was happy that Missy had a new friend and was happy to host her. Now, when you look at pictures of the two of them, Karen was slightly bigger than Missy. And when I say she stood up for Missy, she stood up for Missy. She was literally Missy's bodyguard, and that was their, inside joke. Now, in the opposite sense, and I'm sure some of you guys have witnessed or experienced this, because Karen was stronger and tougher than Missy, now all the kids would also pick on Karen for her looks, but for the opposite reason, for being masculine, awkward, tall. And Missy was being picked on again for the opposite reason, for being too good looking. Kids. Now, although they were best friends, Karen always had this weird vibe. Karen's first visit to Missy's house was rather strange. Irene, Missy's mother, claims that as the two girls were hanging out and chatting, Irene was in the kitchen fixing snacks for them. And as she returned, she heard Karen bragging about having two sets of parents, which Irene at the time kind of found amusing because in her eyes, she believed that having divorced parents was nothing to brag about. She dismissed it and just thought, teenage girls, they can be silly. Until she met Karen's mom, Paula, who told Irene that she was never divorced. And it was at this stage that Irene found it really strange that a child would ever lie about something like this. Why would you want your parents to be divorced? It was a weird thing to lie about. So anyway, Paula then explains to Irene that her daughter just has this overactive imagination, and Irene just kind of left it there. But that was who Karen was. That lie was her way of saying that she had it better than Missy already, during that first meeting, because she had two sets of parents, At this point, she was already projecting her inferiority complex. So as this friendship continued, Karen would dominate Missy by, driving away all her friends, including potential boyfriends. Missy believed that Karen, was her best friend and she was looking out for her and only wanted the best for her, as any best friend would want for their best friend. But the fact of the matter is that Karen was only looking out for herself. She did not want Missy to have any friends apart from her. And to achieve this, she would make up nasty lies about Missy And then whenever girls were mean to her because of these lies, she would then provide emotional support to Missy. Very manipulative. Karen also became upset when Missy began spending less time with her and wanted to spend more time with boys, as you do at that age. Karen, being the good friend that she is, then starts a rumor that Missy was having sex with multiple boys. As a result of this rumor, Missy was then beaten up by a bunch of girls because they began accusing Missy of sleeping with their boyfriends. Karen would then do the same thing, come to her defense, console her, and reassure Missy that she had nothing to worry about, as Karen had her back. Karen was going to be there for you. Karen's your girl. Throughout this friendship, Karen's lies and manipulations just continued. And soon she met a guy, became her boyfriend, and she fell madly in love. She thought she was finally getting noticed by the boys, just like her best friend Missy, who she equally loved and hated at the same time. Missy, on the other hand, apparently was not doing well because, and I find this strange, her parents were getting separated, which I thought she only lived with her mother, so I didn't understand this bit, but either way, apparently her parents were getting separated, so she was getting upset and she just wasn't coping. And soon, Karen's world would also turn upside down when at just the age of 15, she would discover that she was pregnant by her new boyfriend. On 31st January 1983, Karen gave birth to a baby girl, and, having a child at such a young age proved to be very challenging, as I'm sure it would be. And also during her, later pregnancy and early days of raising this baby, Karen was obviously not attending school. And due to that, Karen and Missy began drifting apart a little bit, not due to anything specific, but just more so the fact that they just weren't seeing each other every single day anymore. In the meantime, Missy becomes friends with another girl called Laura Doyle, who she actually became pretty close with while Karen was away from school. Like Karen, Laura was not popular at school, and she came from a broken family of addicts. And Laura actually also knew Karen because all three of them lived on that same street. So all three of them just sort of knew each other. While Karen's family actually helped her take care of the baby, she would often leave the house to go and visit Missy. And Missy's home kind of became a retreat where she could go and just escape all her problems, being a new mom, it's quite stressful. So during one of these visits to Missy's house, she finds a boy in Missy's room. Karen then tells Missy, you need to get rid of him right this minute. However, Missy was like, no, I've got this boy here for a reason. I'm chilling with him. And Karen just became psychotic. She went into a frenzy and had this massive meltdown. And Missy was like, what the fuck? But she just dismissed Karen's sort of outburst as a result of just being stressed from being a new mom, having a new baby. And the fact that Karen had actually broken up with her baby daddy took a toll on her. So she kind of shrugged it off. But Karen still resented Missy and only made up with her later, not because she was, dying to be friends with Missy, but more so because Missy's popularity and the fact that she was beautiful and liked by boys and stuff still mattered to Karen. She wanted to be a part of that. But deep down, her hate for Missy just kind of festered and grew even more. And I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, but when I was a lot younger, I definitely have. I was pretty close friends with this girl, only for a year. But then when we joined the same high school, whenever I made a new friend at this high school, she would lose her mind. She was a little shy and more reserved, and I was definitely, much louder. I was very silly, and I would just always get along with people, joking with them and just being silly. And she hated when other people would laugh at my jokes, and she would get angry if I literally texted another friend. It was so weird, and it was such a toxic kind of time because we'd fight all the time and I'd be like, what did I do? I didn't even do anything. But I don't think she was a bad person. I think she wasn't confident, and maybe she was scared to lose me as a friend, sort of. I don't know. Have you guys ever experienced anything like that? Anyway, so this boy that Missy began dating, his name was Randy Fernandez, And Randy was like the bad boy at school. He was always partying. Like that was just his thing. And their relationship only lasted a month because Missy broke it off with him because he was always partying, and she just didn't, like, it just didn't work out. That wasn't something she was interested in. But despite this, Missy did have true feelings for him. And I know it's just a month, but at that time, these things can happen. So Missy then convinces Karen to come back to school for the 10th grade. And Karen agreed, but her insecurities would not let her go to the same school as Missy and also face her former classmates. Like, she was probably embarrassed about having a baby so young. So she decided to go to another school called Mission High, which was considered a school, like a high school for dropouts. So now, like I mentioned before, you know, Missy's parents were getting separated, and that was really something Missy was struggling with. So in an act of rebellion, she decided to drop out of school too and then join Karen at Mission High. Which, how do you do? Don't you need your parents' permission to move schools? I mean, huh? Can someone please explain that? So Missy thought by moving schools, it would also cement her loyalty to Karen, to be like, look, bitch, look what I did for you, you know? So when they went to the school, both of their grades ended up dropping heaps because they spent a lot of their times just drinking and smoking with the wrong crowd. Missy's brother Mark actually confronted Missy about this and decided to speak with her and let her know that, you know, what she was doing wasn't right and that her behavior wasn't right and the people she was surrounding herself with, you know, wasn't right. And they actually got into a huge fight because of this, because he was like, you need to find new friends. These people are not good for you. Still, at this new school, Missy's popularity just kept growing, which was obviously to Karen's disappointment. And even worse for Karen, at this new school, boys would still flock to Missy. So remember her friend Laura Doyle, the friend she became close with when Karen was pregnant and having her baby. Laura begins to date one of Missy's ex-boyfriends. His name was Victor Amaya, and shortly after Missy broke it off with Randy, guess what? Karen was like, oh, I think I like him, and then began to date Randy. And once again, Karen falls pregnant with Randy's baby. And both ex-boyfriends, Randy and Victor, actually remained friends with Missy, but Laura and Karen had this suspicion that Missy wanted to get back with the guys, despite Missy now being in a new relationship with a guy named George. I mean, these friends are not her friends. Who does that? Who dates a friend's ex? I mean, what is wrong with these girls? Now, it seemed that Missy was okay with her friends dating her exes. And I don't want to sound mean, and don't come for me in the comments, but it almost seems like Missy was kind of a pushover. I mean, the fact that she let Karen kind of treat her that way, she didn't figure it out, or she was just super nice, you know? Because she kind of had no problem with the way people treated her, even if it was pretty bad, you know? I mean, I guess she just believed that these girls were her friends. So during a visit to Karen's house, Missy's visit, Randy pulls Missy onto his lap and tells Missy, I still have feelings for you. Karen walks in, sees this, and then has another one of her meltdowns. Missy pulled Karen aside and tried to explain to her that that's not what it looked like, and that she pushed Randy off her as soon as he did that, and that she thinks that Karen should break up with Randy because he just wasn't a good guy. But none of Missy's explanations registered in her brain. And from that moment on, she vowed that Missy would never take anything away from her ever again. She wasn't trying to take anything away from you, you know what I'm saying? So then in the meanwhile, her friend Laura, she was dumped by Missy's ex, Victor, because Victor said that, dang, you're way too jealous about Missy and I can't have this in a relationship. Like, you're crazy. So now Laura was like, bitch, what? Both these girls are pissed off. And none of this was Missy's fault, by the way. So speaking of this three-way friendship, people that saw them together initially would say that these girls were so close. They were like sisters. They would do anything for each other. But then on the other hand, some people would say they hated each other and they were always fighting. Karen and Missy actually also got into a physical altercation one day at a neighborhood park. According to witnesses, Karen allegedly threatened to hit Missy over the head with an empty beer bottle, And after she did, she threw Missy to the ground and began punching her. Missy's mother, Irene, had apparently known about this altercation and was well aware of it. Now, for those two girls, Laura and Karen, the breakup with Missy's ex-boyfriends, Victor and Randy, just infuriated them. And this made them want to plot revenge on Missy because it was her fault somehow. However, even though they felt this way, they still pretended to be on good terms with Missy because with all her faults, she was still pretty popular and they wanted in on this stupid popularity. To achieve this vengeance, Karen calls Missy around a week after her massive outburst about sitting on Randy's lap, and she apologizes to Missy. Missy, as always, believed her friend and made up with her. She forgave her. And this would prove to be Missy's biggest and final mistake. On October 1st, 1985, Karen and Laura put their plan into motion. Missy tells her mother, Irene, that she's going to the park with Laura and that she would promise to call her if it got late and she wasn't returning home. Irene allowed Missy to go because she knew the park that Missy was talking about, as the girls went there all the time. So at around 3:30 p.m. on October 1st, Laura, she picks up Missy and then drives off with her. So later that day at around 6 p.m., Laura phones Irene and was like, "Hey, how's it going? Can I talk to Missy?" And Irene was like, "What?" She found this strange because less than 3 hours ago, Laura picked up Missy and they were supposed to be, spending the day together. Laura then tells Irene like, "Oh, we actually didn't end up going to that park and I dropped off Missy at another park while I went to go put gas in my car." She then tells Irene that when she dropped off Missy, she sees Missy meeting up with 3 young guys in a blue Camaro. And Laura then says that once she put gas in her car, she went back to the same park to pick up Missy, but Missy was no longer there. And neither were those young boys in the blue Camaro. So the next morning, Irene checks in with her daughter's friends and no one had heard from her. So then she reports Missy as missing. She was then informed by the police that it would take up to 24 hours for a missing persons report to be submitted. Meanwhile, Karen never ever left Irene's side while the search for Missy was underway. 3 days later, on October 4th, Missy's lifeless body was found by hikers. Missy's body was actually found at that same park that she said she was going to with Laura. Missy's hair had been cut off, and from the autopsy, the cause of death was drowning. While the police were doing investigations of their own, Laura, Irene, and Karen would also go searching for this blue Camaro. Karen and Laura were always present and active members in this investigation. Doesn't this remind you of Skylar? They helped in any way they could, and they even went to Missy's funeral. Of course, they were her friends. According to Irene, after Missy's body was found, Karen then moved into Irene's home. Irene said that Karen was obsessed with Missy's case and that she would even tape photos and clues of this murder to the wall to help try and solve the case. Irene said that Karen would go to Missy's gravesite multiple times a week, and she would even visit the site where her body was found multiple times. However, Karen's account of the events told a completely different story. She said that she did not move in with Karen, but she did visit a lot. And she said she never ever went to the site where Missy's body was found, ever. At this point, police had no clear suspects or any real evidence, and nothing would happen in this case for another 3 years. For years, the only story that police knew was that Laura dropped off Missy at this park, and then she was seen, talking to 3 guys in a blue Camaro, and that when she went back to pick her up, she was no longer there. 2 years after Missy was found, Laura then changes her story and told police that she actually dropped off Missy at a church, and the reason that she never mentioned this before was that she was trying to actually cover up this drug deal. 3 years later, in July 1988, a girl named Eva Chirombolo comes forward to the police and tells them that she was actually with Missy, Laura, and Karen on the day that Missy went missing. When Laura went to pick up Missy to go to the park, she wasn't alone. Eva was actually driving in a car behind Laura, and in that car with Eva was Karen. Eva tells police that Missy, Laura, and Karen all walked into the woods while Eva stayed waiting in the car. It is unknown if Missy actually knew that Eva and Karen were following Missy and Laura in the car behind. And it was at this point, once Eva's version came out, is that the real story was uncovered. Karen then admits to the police that Missy, Laura, and herself walked Missy into the woods while Eva stayed in the car. And at one point, Missy was too tired to keep walking, so they ended up stopping. And it was at this point that Laura and Karen attacked her and began cutting off Missy's hair. And following this, Missy began screaming and yelling and asking them, "Why are you doing this to me?" And shortly after, weirdly, the girls, they just kept walking, and Laura asks Missy if she wants to get into the creek with her, which Missy didn't want to. And regardless of that, Karen pushes Missy into the water, and as soon as she was in the water, Laura ties Missy's hands behind her back and then starts to push her head underwater. Karen then left Laura and Missy alone in the water, knowing Karen's full intention was to drown Missy. So what actually happened that day? So it was Laura's job to lure Missy, which she did. She brings her to the park. And at the park, Eva, who was a new friend of the girls at the time, was already waiting at the park with Karen. And at the park, Laura and Karen begin to argue. Laura goes back to the car, takes Missy with her in the passenger seat. She speeds off, heading to Camp Colby, which was one of the girls' hangout spots. When they reach the parking lot of the camp, Karen and Laura then confront Missy, and Missy, she's now crying, and she was led through a dirt road by the two girls. And Eva apparently was following behind, not in the car, following behind the girls at a distance, confused as to what was actually going on. And she wasn't alone. Missy too was confused as to why her two friends, her two best friends, were doing this to her. She wondered, what did she do to deserve this? They led her to this little clearing by the stream and made her sit on a rock, and they just kept insulting her about how she was being promiscuous. Both girls had accused Missy of having sex with their boyfriends now, and they told her that she had messed up too many relationships, which is so strange to me because Karen was the one initially making up these rumors about Missy sleeping with people's boyfriends. So now she's believing her own crazy lies. It's like her own lies eventually became the truth for her. Laura then grabbed Missy's hair, and then Karen began to cut it to humiliate Missy. And that is something I've noticed in a lot of cases people do as a way to make a woman less beautiful. Her hair is her beauty, so they chop it off as a way to make her ugly. That's what they believe. So after that, Laura and Karen then take Missy into the stream and they drown her. And they put this massive wooden log on her back to keep her down. That evening, Laura phones Missy's mother and says, "Hey, where's Missy?" And Irene knew that Laura was with Missy, but Laura tells her about Missy running into these boys in this blue Camaro and then wanting to hang out with them and never returned. And Irene, believing that these girls were kind of her daughter's friends, was happy with the explanation, just waiting for Missy to return home. And the next morning, Irene goes into Missy's room, realizes she never comes home, and then she contacts the friends, calls the police. After this horrific attack on her own best friend, brazenly, Karen moves into the Avila household and interjects herself into Missy's family. The Avila family treated Karen as one of their own, She was mourning for her best friend the same way they were mourning for their daughter, their sister. Eva, who witnessed the murder, although wasn't really involved, she kept her mouth shut. She feared she would be dead if she ratted out Laura and Karen. And Karen, at the time, who was super supportive of Irene and Missy's family, at the time, even though she, denied this, she denied moving into the household and all that kind of stuff, she began investigating Missy's murder. She went back to the crime scene with a group of Missy's friends along with the ex, Victor Amaya, Laura's ex. And there they found on a tree carvings that said Missy and Karen, friends forever. And they also found the names Randy and Karen along with like slash markings crossing it out. Karen, who had previously told her friends that she had never been to that site before, found it odd that she found her name with Randy's on a tree. So she explained it must be Randy who wrote that on the tree and then slashed it out, and that he must be responsible for Missy's murder. This was Randy, the father of her second child, who she aborted to spite him. She ended up conning her friends to accept this story, and then they plotted to kill Randy. Great. Victor, Missy's ex, then went and beat Randy so badly to the point he was barely alive, left him for dead, and then when they later found out that he was actually taken to hospital and he was recuperating, Karen loses her mind and says to Victor, like, you need to go there and finish him off. And they almost succeeded, apparently, only stopping from shooting Randy dead at the last second. For 3 years, Karen and Laura got away with the murder of Missy Avila. Eva, who had then lost her brother to suicide, then ended up just feeling so guilty, and in 1998, 3 years later, told the police everything that had happened. It took the loss of her brother to come forward, and if that never happened, maybe she never would have. The following day, on July 27th, Karen and Laura were arrested, and they were charged with first-degree murder, to the complete shock and horror of the Avila family. They were like daughters to them, you know, like Karen even lived under their roof. So the trial began in January 1990 and March 1990, and later Karen and Laura were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The jurors later on said that they were not convinced that this murder was pre-planned, and that is why they rejected the first-degree murder charge. Karen did 23 years in prison and got out in 2011, and Laura got out in 2012. While not much is known about Laura, Karen is now a published author who presents in high school topics about the dangers of bullying. She started school tours, you know, talking about anti-bullying, and in 2013 she released books called Hopes Beyond the Fences and My Life, I Lived It. And she actually released these books to coincide with Missy's murder anniversary. Like, how sick is that? And obviously in these books, she's talking about Missy. So the Avila family sued Karen in 2015 and they won. So now all the proceeds from her second book go straight to the Avila family. And as a result of this case, the state of California passed Missy's law, which requires victims' families to be contacted prior to criminals like publishing any material about the crimes. And after the girls were arrested, the real truth about their friendship came out. Many people said that Karen was definitely jealous of Missy because she was prettier and she had more friends. And they also said that Karen was always trying to prove who she was, while Missy could just be herself and be free. Missy's family even went as far to say that Karen was trying to steal Missy's life, which is why she moved into the Avila household after Missy's death, perhaps trying to take her place. And it's so insane to me that people like this even exist. Like, why be friends with someone that's making you feel shit about yourself? You know what I mean? Not saying that Karen is right, but why do that to yourself? If you feel so horrible being around this person, but you want to be popular, like, you need to distance yourself from that person. You shouldn't be around that person who's making you feel horrible, you know? It's not Missy's fault. I'm just saying, Karen, it just made no sense. Like, how do people even do these things or think of doing these things at such young ages? Are they not scared of authority? Like, I was so freaking scared of everything. Like, I was like, oh, I don't want to get in trouble. Like, I really would never have even had the balls to even think of something like this, let alone do it. And then another thing is, how do they even find people like them who are willing to do things like this at that age? First Karen, and then Laura, and then Victor trying to kill Randy, knowing his ex-girlfriend was murdered. Like, what? What was going on with that group? This case, another sad one, where a poor, trusting person becomes a victim for absolutely no reason. What? Jealousy? Human mental issues and delusions, rather than Missy actually doing something to any one of these girls. She was literally just living her life like a normal teenager. Let me know your thoughts on this case below, guys. I would love to hear what you think. Do you think that this one is, well, we all feel like it's similar to Skylar Neese, but which one was worse? Or are they the same? I don't know. It's kind of crazy. They're so similar. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you want to check out some of my other videos, click over here. And I will see you in the next one, guys. Besitos. Mwah. Bye.